The train cut through the desert like a blade, screeching on steel rails that shimmered in the midday heat. It was the only sound for miles, save for the groaning wind that carried dust across the scorched land. When the locomotive finally hissed to a halt at the edge of the town of Tallow Creek, a heavy boot stepped down from the last car. A black duster flared at the ankles. Jasper Harlan squinted against the sun, cigar clenched tight between his teeth. He didn't look like a man about to get married. He looked like a man about to be hanged. The townsfolk stared from shaded porches, squinting and whispering behind cracked mugs of coffee. They knew who he was. Everyone did. Jasper Harlan, railroad tycoon, war veteran, the iron-souled bastard who'd laid track through Indian country and outlaw hills alike. He was the kind of man who survived a bullet to the chest and billed the shooter for wasting his time. But today, even Jasper looked uneasy. His jaw was set too tight. His cigar was burning low. He hated weddings, especially his own. Inside the dusty church, cooled only by fluttering ceiling fans and a few cracked windows, Reverend Briscoe stood sweating in his collar. Jasper's coat was too formal for the heat, but he didn't remove it, didn't fidget. His eyes were fixed on the aisle. Empty pews lined the chapel, no guests, no music. Just the board members who'd forced his hand into this cursed union, seated like vultures waiting for the corpse to drop. He could still hear the conversation in his head. Merge the lines, Harlan. This marriage ties your name to Maddox Freight. You marry her, we own the West. He didn't even know her name until the ink dried. Only the whisper, Eloise Maddox, daughter of one of the old Southern families, kept hidden away. Rumors swirled around her like locusts, disfigured in a fire, twisted in the face, touched in the head. No one had seen her in years. Harlan hadn't cared. He didn't believe in love, not anymore. Business was business. His heart had been buried 8 years ago with another name on a headstone. Phil. Something about this felt wrong. The chapel doors opened. A gust of wind blew in dry heat and the sharp scent of mesquite. And there she stood. Eloise Maddox. She was covered head to toe in ivory silk. Her gloved hands clutched a small bouquet. A heavy veil obscured her face entirely, trailing past her waist. For a moment, she stood unmoving at the threshold. Then her boots, he noted they were well-worn, not decorative, moved forward in even, elegant steps. She walked alone. No father on her arm. No music. Just silence. When she reached the altar, she paused beside Jasper. Her chin tilted slightly up beneath the veil. He could see nothing but shadow, could feel nothing but tension winding like a coiled spring between them. "You're late," Jasper muttered. Her voice came soft and clear. "I wasn't sure you'd show." The Reverend cleared his throat. "Shall we?" The ceremony was mercifully short. No grand declarations. No sentimental readings. Just vows recited like legal terms, like the dry script of a business transaction. Jasper spoke his lines without emotion. Eloise did the same. Her voice never trembled. When Briscoe finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Jasper didn't move. Neither did she. The Reverend coughed awkwardly and skipped ahead. The documents were signed with cold ink. The marriage sealed, the deal done. Jasper turned to Eloise. "You can take the veil off now." She looked at him for a long moment. Then replied, evenly, "Not yet." He should have been irritated. Instead, he found himself curious. Outside, the board members shook hands with the enthusiasm of gamblers cashing in a bet. Jasper and Eloise stood side by side on the chapel steps, photographed like strangers forced to stand too close. The ride back to his estate was a long one. Dust kicked up around the carriage wheels as the town faded behind them. Inside the cab, the silence between them grew heavier by the mile. Jasper tried to light another cigar, but the match blew out. He didn't try again. "You didn't bring anything with you," he said finally. "I travel light." "You plan on staying veiled forever?" A pause. "Would that bother you?" He turned to face her. Her veil shifted as the wind moved through the open window. Still, not a glimpse of her face. I'm not the romantic type, he said. But I don't like mysteries under my roof. She looked out the window. Then perhaps you shouldn't have let strangers choose your bride. His lip twitched. The first hint of a smile. It faded quickly. The estate rose up from the desert like an outpost from another world, stone, iron, and glass perched on a hill overlooking the rails. Jasper built it himself after the war, piece by piece. It was no place for a delicate woman. He hadn't expected one. When the carriage stopped, he climbed out first and offered her a hand. She didn't take it. She stepped down on her own, lifted her skirts, and walked up the stairs with quiet confidence. Mrs. Hawthorne, the housekeeper, greeted them with a polite curtsy and a curious glance. "The master bedroom is prepared," she said. "We'll need two," Eloise interrupted. Jasper raised a brow. Eloise turned toward him. "This is a marriage of necessity, Mr. Harlan. Not affection." He chuckled once. "You think I'll object?" She didn't answer. Just vanished down the hall. That night, Jasper poured himself whiskey and stared at the fire for a long time. His home, once silent, now held an echo that didn't belong to him. A presence just out of reach. He'd faced down bushwhackers, outlaws, and cannons. But this woman, with her stillness and veil, unsettled him. The next morning, she was already in the dining room, dressed in gray, gloves on, veil still draped. She drank black coffee and read a book with French print. Jasper stood in the doorway a moment before speaking. "Planning to haunt my halls like a ghost?" She turned a page. "Do ghosts eat breakfast?" "Depends on the ghost." He sat across from her. The silence was not comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. He tried again. "You're not what I expected." "You didn't expect anything." "You're right," he admitted. She set the book down. "You built your empire with iron and sweat. You command thousands of miles of rail. But you couldn't say no to the board." "I could've," he said. "But it would've cost me half the line. And you value your line more than your pride." He looked at her, truly looked at her. "My pride died with the war." For the first time she paused. He saw her hand tighten slightly on the cup. "And yours?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she rose. "I'll take my coffee in the garden." Later that day, he watched her from the window. She moved like she belonged to the earth, not to any man, not to any plan. She bent to touch desert flowers, lifted a lizard from the hot stone and let it scurry away. Veiled, still. Unseen, always. Something in him twisted. That night, a thunderstorm rolled across the plains. The kind that blew sand sideways and snapped tree limbs clean in two. The lightning lit up the estate in staccato bursts. He found her in the library, a candle burning beside her. She didn't startle when he entered. "Storm's bad," he said. "Isn't it always?" He approached slowly. She didn't move. He stopped a few feet away. "I don't know who you are beneath that veil, but I know strength when I see it." She turned slightly toward him. "And I know pain when I hear it." They stood in silence, the crack of thunder punctuating the space between them. "I buried the woman I loved during a battle," Jasper said softly. "I carried her ring in my coat pocket for 5 years before I realized no one was coming to save me." Eloise didn't reply. "So when they said I had to marry a stranger," he added, "I figured it couldn't hurt. I was already too numb to feel it." He expected pity. Instead, she spoke coolly. "And yet, here you are, talking to a ghost." Another flash of lightning. Jasper took a step closer. "Take the veil off." "No." "Why?" Her voice was steady. "Because beauty is a weapon. One I've had to holster to stay alive." His breath caught. Not in anger. In understanding. "I don't want your pity," she said. "And I don't want your lust." "What do you want?" She hesitated. Then quietly, "Time." He nodded. And for the first time, he turned and left her alone. But 2 nights later, something changed. There was no warning. No dramatic thunder. No storm. Just the hush of soft footsteps on the wooden floor of the study. He looked up from his chair, whiskey in hand, as she entered. She stood by the firelight, and slowly, silently, she lifted the veil. It fell like a curtain to the floor. Jasper didn't speak. Couldn't. She was beautiful. Not just in the way a man expects, though she was that, too, but in the way moonlight is beautiful when it touches broken things and makes them whole again. She didn't smile. Didn't blush. Just stood still, waiting. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Jasper Harlan felt the spark of something he'd thought was dead. Hope. He rose to his feet, set the whiskey down, and said the only thing he could think to say. Now that's more than I expected. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. And then she turned and walked away, veil forgotten. He didn't follow. But he would. Oh, he would. Because the woman he married was no ghost. She was a fire. And Jasper was already starting to burn. The morning after she unveiled herself, Jasper woke with a tension in his chest that no amount of whiskey could dull. He stared at the ceiling of his sprawling estate, a palace carved from grit and rail profits, and thought of the woman down the hall, Eloise Maddox, Harlan by law, a stranger by every other measure. He'd expected coldness, submission, or even madness behind the veil. What he got was eyes that didn't flinch, beauty that wasn't fragile, and a calmness that unsettled even him. She hadn't spoken of it afterward. No mention of the moment, no shift in behavior. As if lifting the veil had cost her nothing. But Jasper knew better. It had cost her something. And he intended to find out what. He entered the breakfast room to find her already there, as she always was, gloved hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee, back straight, eyes on the window as if tracking something the rest of the world couldn't see. The veil was gone now, and yet she still wore a mask, only this one was made of restraint. "Morning," he said. "You're late." "I didn't know there was a schedule." She sipped her coffee. "There's always a schedule. The world just stops caring if you fall behind." Jasper pulled out the chair opposite her and sat, studying her openly now. She didn't look away. It was always like this, silent wars wrapped in soft tones and measured glances. But beneath it all, he could feel it. Pressure. Like something was going to break. He poured himself a cup and didn't touch it. "Why did you do it?" he asked. She blinked. "Do what?" "Show your face." A pause. The kind that lasted just a second too long. "I got tired of hiding," she said. "Or maybe I wanted you to stop looking at me like a ghost. You could have hidden forever. I wouldn't have asked again." "I know." She glanced at him. "That's why I showed you." They sat in that fragile quiet until Mrs. Hawthorne entered with a tray of eggs and biscuits. She shot Jasper a look, one he ignored, and then vanished just as quickly. The staff had learned to walk like whispers ever since Eloise arrived. Jasper finally took a bite. "You carry yourself like a woman who's always looking for the exit." "That's because I am." His chewing slowed. Eloise set down her fork. "You're not the only one who lost something in the war, Jasper." He leaned forward slightly. "You were just a girl during the war." "And girls don't bleed?" Her voice was quiet. "Don't suffer." "I didn't mean." "No," she said, looking away. "But that's what they all say." He didn't reply, not immediately. There was weight in her words, history he hadn't earned the right to ask about. Yet, later that day, he found her in the rail yard, walking between the iron beasts like she belonged among them. Men paused their work to watch. She ignored them. Her dress swayed like smoke. The sun caught in her hair, and the air shifted around her like heat rising off gunmetal. Jasper approached her slowly. "You're making the crew nervous," he said. "I thought they worked for you." "They do. Doesn't mean they've seen a woman walk through here like she owns the ground." She stopped near one of the locomotives, turned to face him. "I'm not scared of soot and steel, Mr. Harlan. I'm starting to think you're not scared of anything." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fear's a luxury. I lost mine years ago." That was the second time she'd said something like that. Jasper folded his arms, watching her carefully. What happened to you, Eloise? She looked up at the train, fingers brushing along the cold steel. You're used to knowing everything, aren't you? I like understanding what I've tied myself to. She stepped closer. You tied yourself to a freight line, not a wife. I'm starting to think I got both. The heat between them crackled, invisible and undeniable. But just when he thought she might speak, give him something real, she turned away and began walking again. That night, he found her outside in the garden with a lantern in one hand and a small pistol in the other. She didn't point it at him. Just held it like a habit. That loaded? He asked. Yes. Expecting someone? Always. He leaned against the stone railing. The moon bathed her face in silver. She looked ethereal and dangerous all at once. Who's looking for you? He asked. Her fingers tightened on the grip of the pistol. I never said anyone was. You didn't have to. She sat on the bench, placing the lantern beside her. Do you know what it's like to be wanted for what you represent, not for who you are? He said nothing. I was 12 when the war ended, she continued. 13 when my father tried to marry me off to an old friend, some decaying colonel who used to command black regiments and beat them for breathing wrong. A man who thought women were livestock in lace. Jasper's jaw tightened. I said no, she whispered. He said yes. The silence was thunderous. I ran, she said. Faked illness. Staged a death. Hid for 5 years. Changed my name twice. But they keep looking. Not for Eloise. For what I represent to them. Property. Connection. Bloodline. She looked up at him now, eyes gleaming in the dark. So yes, I carry a pistol. And yes, I walk like I'm looking for exit. Because men like my father, and the colonel, don't stop until they own what they believe is theirs. Jasper sat beside her, the weight between them shifting into something heavier, more dangerous. You think they'll come here? He asked. They always do. And if they do, he said, I won't let them take you. Her eyes flicked to him. Why? Because I'm not the man who lets the people he cares about get dragged away. She held his gaze. You care about me? He didn't answer. Not with words. He reached for her hand. Not to take it. Just to touch. She didn't flinch. But she didn't let him hold it either. The next morning, things felt different. Not soft, not romantic. Just sharp. Alive. They ate in silence again, but now it was charged. Her veil remained off, and he watched her mouth curve slightly when he poured her coffee before she could reach for it. Outside, trouble brewed. A rider came from the southern ridge, dusty, fast, carrying something folded in oilskin. Jasper met him in the yard. A letter, the courier said. Paid good money to get this to you. The seal wasn't official, but Jasper knew a threat when he held one. He read the note slowly, eyes narrowing with every line. When he entered the house again, Eloise was in the parlor, thumbing through a stack of books. Who knows you're alive? He asked, voice low. She looked up. Why? Because I just got a letter addressed to Jasper Harlan and the runaway ghost he married. Her body stiffened. Who signed it? No one. Just said, tell the girl her past is catching up. For the first time since he met her, Eloise looked afraid. He walked closer. Who sent it? She sat down, hands suddenly shaking. Colonel Maddox. The one your father wanted you to marry? He never stopped looking. He's obsessed with legacy. He thinks if he owns me, he owns the bloodline that matters. Jasper paced, then stopped abruptly. You think he'll come here? He's too proud not to. Then he'll come with men. She nodded once. And he'll come to kill you. Jasper didn't flinch. Let him try. She rose now, eyes burning. You don't understand. He doesn't care about dying. He only cares about control. And if he finds out we're close, he'll use me to hurt you. I've been hurt, Jasper growled. That didn't break me. This isn't like the war, she snapped. This is personal. He moved to her, close enough to see the fear behind the fire in her gaze. I know what personal feels like, he said. I buried it once. I won't do it again. Her breath caught. Just for a moment. Then she stepped away. I need to pack. Pack. If Maddox is coming, I can't stay here. You're not running again. I'm protecting you. Damn it, Eloise, he said. You married me. You don't get to disappear every time something knocks at the door. She turned sharply. You think this is about fear? About me running from danger? I've lived in danger my whole life. But if he kills you, I won't survive that. The silence that followed was raw. Jasper crossed the room, slower this time. You don't have to protect me from your past. You don't know what it's like, she whispered. To be hunted. Then let me learn, he said. She looked at him, all defenses flickering, just for a heartbeat. I don't know how to let anyone fight for me. Then I'll teach you. For a long time, she didn't move. Then, quietly, if he comes, we fight together. He nodded. The moment held, fierce and fragile. But outside, the wind had changed direction. The dust swirled differently now. And far out on the horizon, a lone rider watched the estate through a spyglass, then turned and vanished into the canyon. Inside, Eloise moved toward Jasper, laid her hand briefly on his chest. Her voice was low. I won't wear the veil again. He placed his hand over hers. You won't need to. But neither of them knew just how soon the past would arrive. And when it did, it would come with fire. The sun rose blood-red over the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the Harlan estate. A stillness hung in the air, unnatural, like the desert was holding its breath. Jasper stood on the front porch with a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand, eyes narrowed on the horizon. His fingers were tense around the handle. He hadn't slept much, not since the letter came. Inside, the house was quieter than usual. Eloise hadn't come down yet. Normally, she was in the breakfast room before him, reading or pacing, already sharp-eyed and alert. Today, she remained behind her door. He knocked twice before entering. She was standing at the vanity, pinning her hair up with quick, practiced fingers. A revolver lay on the table beside her, polished and loaded. Her posture was rigid, coiled, like she'd spent the night awake and ready to move at the first sound of boot. He set the coffee down beside her. You're not eating. Not hungry. You didn't sleep. I didn't want to dream. Jasper reached for the revolver, flipped it open, checked the cylinder, and snapped it shut. You always keep it loaded? She nodded once. Always. He didn't ask why. He already knew. Women like her didn't have the luxury of being unarmed. He watched her tie her hair into a knot, then tuck it beneath a brimmed hat. Going somewhere? Not far, she said. Just need to think. You think better in town? I think better where I can see who's watching me. Jasper moved in front of her, blocking the doorway. We need a plan. She lifted her chin. We need distance. For what? For clarity. And for safety. You think leaving this house will keep you safe? I think it might keep you alive. That silenced him for a second. She adjusted her glove. I wasn't lying, Jasper. Maddox doesn't come to negotiate. He doesn't come to talk. He comes to claim. His jaw tightened. He won't find you alone this time. He doesn't need to find me alone. He just needs to find me afraid. Are you? She looked him in the eye. I've been afraid since I was 13. But I'm not hiding anymore. That was the difference. She wasn't the girl running from shadows anymore. She was standing in the light, shoulders squared, weapon loaded. He stepped aside. If you're going to town, I'm coming with you. Eloise looked surprised, then nodded once. They saddled up together. Jasper's horse a tall, broad-chested stallion with battle scars from rail lines long finished. Eloise's a sleeker roan mare with speed in her bones. They rode in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. The kind that meant something was about to break. Tallow Creek hadn't changed in the last week, but Jasper felt it shift under his boots the moment they stepped off their horses. Eyes followed them with sharper interest. Conversations halted quicker. The air had a different flavor now, and it tasted like tension. They stopped at the general store for supplies, then at the telegraph office. Jasper sent a short message to his foreman in the next town over. Possible trouble. Keep the line clear. The clerk eyed him strangely but said nothing. Eloise lingered near the back of the saloon, speaking to no one, observing everything. Jasper joined her, ordered 2 coffees, and leaned on the rail beside her. You recognize anyone? She didn't answer for a moment. Then, 3 men near the piano weren't here last week. Their coats are too clean. Hands too still. Mercenaries. Maddox hires ex-soldiers. Men without flags. Loyal only to coin. Jasper looked them over discreetly. How many do you think he has? If he's serious? At least 10 already in town. More waiting at the ridge. That letter was a warning. No, she said softly. That letter was bait. Jasper's pulse ticked up. He wants us to panic. He wants me to run. She turned then, eyes burning. But I'm not running. They left the saloon as a storm began to gather, slow, high clouds building on the edge of the sky like an omen. As they rode back toward the estate, Jasper noticed the dust trails far off in the hills. Riders. Scouts. Watching. Back inside the house, they began preparing in silence. He went to the basement, unlocked the gun cabinet. Shotguns, rifles, pistols, all relics of his past now needed again. He loaded them without ceremony. Eloise organized the supplies, packed provisions, double-checked windows and doors. That night they ate in the dining room with pistols at their side. Eloise broke the silence first. You want to know why I agreed to marry you? Jasper looked up. It wasn't the money, she said. It wasn't the name. I figured. It was because I was tired, she said. Tired of running. Tired of hiding behind fake names. I thought if I married someone powerful, someone feared, maybe he'd stop chasing me. Jasper didn't speak. But men like Maddox don't stop. They just change tactics. He set his fork down. You married me to end it. I married you hoping to die somewhere that didn't feel like a cage. That hit harder than he expected. I didn't think you'd care, she added. He swallowed. I didn't think I would either. The wind picked up outside. Something hit the window, a pebble maybe. Or a signal. They both stood at the same time. He moved to the window. She moved to the lantern, turned the flame low. In the dim light their eyes met. Jasper whispered, We need a plan. Eloise nodded. Then we start with what we know. They spread out the estate's layout on the table, hallways, rooms, blind spots. Jasper had built it for grandeur, not defense. That was about to change. He showed her the cellar, the escape tunnels he'd carved for emergencies. She showed him how to turn the library bookshelf into a blockade. For the first time, they worked as one. As the wind howled and the fire crackled low, they sat beside each other on the floor of the study. Both armed. Both waiting. Jasper finally said, Tell me what he did to you. She stared at the flames. When I was 16, he tried to buy me. Offered my father land, influence, protection. I was part of the trade. When I refused, he beat the servant who brought him the message. Then he came himself. Her voice was flat. Distant. He told me I'd be happier dead than disobedient. Jasper's knuckles turned white around his glass. So I gave him what he wanted. I burned down the wing of the house where he stayed. Took my mother's name. Disappeared. She turned to look at him. I've been burning bridges ever since. He set the glass down. No more bridges. She leaned her head back against the wall. Just dynamite now? He chuckled once. Exactly. Their eyes met again. Something passed between them. Shared damage, mirrored resilience. He reached out and touched her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. Morning came with fire in the sky. A scout rode up the trail, waving a white cloth. Jasper met him with rifle in hand. A message, the scout said. From Colonel Maddox. Jasper took it. Read it slowly. To the one calling himself husband. Surrender the girl by sundown or we take her ourselves. With interest. He handed it to Eloise inside. Her hands didn't shake. Her jaw didn't clench. I've seen his interest, she said. It usually bleeds. Jasper holstered his revolver. Then we bleed him first. That afternoon, they reinforced the estate. His workers, loyal men who owed him their livelihoods, were stationed along the perimeter. Rifles in the windows, sandbags by the doors. Eloise stood in the tower with a long rifle Jasper didn't know she could handle. She watched the ridge like a hawk. As dusk settled, the distant sound of hooves echoed through the canyon. Then came the horns. A warning. Jasper moved beside her. How many? Too many. Still want to run? No, she said. But I want to hurt him. The sun dipped behind the ridge. Fires lit up in the distance. Maddox was here. And he wanted blood. Inside the house, Jasper gathered the crew. He's not here for money, Jasper told them. He's not here for the land. He's here for her. And I'll be damned if he gets her. The men nodded. Not one flinched. Outside voices carried. The sound of war drums on wooden crate. A declaration. Eloise stood at the front doors, shotgun over her shoulder. I'm done running, she whispered. He joined her. Then we make our stand. They stood together on the porch, eyes on the fire ahead. And as the first gunshot echoed through the canyon, Jasper realized something. She wasn't running anymore. She was ready to burn everything down. With him. Or for him. The first shot shattered a window on the east wing, and the night exploded with fire. Echoes cracked through the canyon like the world itself was splitting open. Jasper Harlan didn't flinch. He stepped out onto the front porch with his shotgun balanced over one arm, eyes burning gold in the lantern glow. Behind him, Eloise moved like wind, silent, controlled, deadly. Flames danced on the far ridge where Maddox's mercenaries had lit their signal fires. 10, maybe 12 of them to start, riding hard and fast down the trail with rifles raised and blood in their eyes. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to end something. Jasper looked at Eloise, and for a moment, time held still. You ready? He asked. Her voice didn't shake. I've been ready since the day I left him. He handed her a second revolver. Stay low, aim true, don't get heroic. I'm already married to a tycoon with a death wish. That's heroic enough. They split apart as gunfire screamed across the open yard. Glass shattered somewhere inside the house. One of Jasper's men returned fire from the upstairs window, dropping a rider from his horse. Another gunman ducked behind a wagon, laying down covering fire. The front lawn became a battlefield. Jasper moved like a man born to war. He swept across the porch, firing twice, once into a mounted shooter's chest, once into the powder keg strapped to his saddlebag. The explosion turned night into day. Bodies scattered. Horses screamed. Inside, Eloise darted through the hallways like shadow incarnate. Her dress torn short for movement, boots hitting wood like a drumbeat. She flung open the library door, and rolled behind the barricade they'd built days ago. 2 gunmen kicked in a side window seconds later, thinking the room empty. She shot both without blinking. More came. Jasper joined her moments later, blood streaked across his temple where glass had grazed him. She moved to him instinctively, brushing the wound with her fingers, but he caught her hand and kissed her knuckles. Later, he said. First we finish this. They pushed deeper into the house, using every passage they'd mapped. Jasper gave orders with short, clipped commands to his crew. Every man stood his ground. The estate echoed with gunshots, screams, and the thunder of boots on hardwood. By midnight it was a siege. Colonel Maddox had arrived. Jasper saw him from the balcony, mounted on a black horse, dressed in a gray Confederate coat long faded to ash, his hair white but his back straight as ever. He was untouched by time, or perhaps hardened by obsession. Behind him, fresh men rode up, reloading as they came. Maddox raised a megaphone to his lip. Eloise! His voice boomed across the yard. Come out. This doesn't have to be your grave. Jasper raised his rifle, fired. The bullet missed Maddox's head by inches. The colonel didn't flinch. Last warning, Maddox roared. Give me the girl, or I take the house brick by brick. Eloise appeared beside Jasper, face pale with fury. That voice used to make me sick, she said. Now it just makes me tired. Jasper's voice was low. He won't stop. Then neither will we. They retreated into the study as the house began to burn. Smoke curled down from the attic, where one of the mercenaries had thrown a lantern through a broken window. Flames licked the walls, dancing like spirits. But the Harlan estate wasn't built cheap. Its bones held strong. Still, time was running short. Eloise coughed into her sleeve. We can't hold them much longer. Jasper wiped soot from his brow. Then we don't. He moved to the bookshelf, kicked it hard. The panel behind it swung open, revealing the passageway to the cellar. We fall back to the train shed, he said. There's one engine fueled and ready. I had it kept prepped for emergencies. She stared at him. You planned this? I've always planned for the worst. She grabbed his arm. This isn't losing a battle. This is leaving your home. He looked at the flames climbing the stairs. It stopped being my home the second you stepped into it. Now it's just a burning building. He turned to his men. Evacuate through the cellar. Get to the train. We take the tracks north. If anyone follows, we derail them. They moved fast. Jasper and Eloise brought up the rear, smoke stinging their eyes. The cellar door slammed shut behind them just as the ceiling above gave way with a crash of burning beams. They emerged into the train shed coughing and covered in ash. The engine loomed in the dark, massive and growling. A beast waiting to run. The cars behind it were empty save for supplies. Ammo, food, water. Not enough for comfort, just enough for survival. Jasper climbed into the cab. We light out now. Before he figures out where we went. But Maddox wasn't guessing. The first bullets hit the shed doors before Jasper could pull the lever. He followed us, Eloise hissed, ducking as splinters flew past her face. Damn right he did. Jasper grabbed the throttle. Hold on. The train roared to life, pistons hissing, steam shrieking like a banshee. Eloise climbed into the car behind, firing back through a narrow window. Jasper kept his head low and the engine screaming. The train burst through the doors, splinters and nails flying. Maddox's men scattered, some firing, others diving for cover. A few horses reared and bucked wildly as the iron beast surged past. But Maddox didn't move. He raised a rifle and fired once, striking the engine side. Jasper flinched but didn't slow. Eloise ducked low, reloading. He's going to chase us. Let him try, Jasper said, jaw tight. They tore through the night like ghosts, firelight fading behind them, the rails shining beneath the moon. Miles slipped away. Wind howled past broken windows. The desert opened before them like salvation. In the cab, Jasper finally exhaled. Beside him, Eloise collapsed into the corner, breathing hard. The hose struck dry earth with a dull thunk, sending up a puff of dust. Florence Carson paused, wiped the back of her hand across her forehead, and stared at the cracked soil that refused to yield. The sun hung high, blistering and cruel, baking the bones of the land beneath its glare. Not even the flies dared to buzz. Her knuckles, raw and scabbed, clenched tighter around the handle. She was determined. A vegetable garden. Not much, just enough to feed 3 mouths. That was the dream. A brittle wind stirred the hem of her dress, lifting it like a whisper of the past. She ignored it. The past had no right to speak. Mama, Arthur called from the edge of the porch. His voice was steady, but it carried that quiet urgency she'd taught him. Never yell unless you mean to scare the crows or warn of something worse. She looked up. Arthur, 13 and wiry, pointed to the southern road. A trail of dust curled lazily into the sky like smoke from a small fire. Ryder. Just one. Florence dropped the hoe. Not because she was tired, though her limbs ached from sun-up labor, but because her gut told her something she hadn't felt in years: danger. Her boots crunched across the brittle grass as she joined her son. "You know him?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the figure inching closer. Arthur squinted. "Too far off. But he's ridin' like he owns the road." That told her enough. She glanced inside the house. Beatrice was somewhere in there, likely playing with her dolls or humming to herself as she brushed her hair with the little comb Florence had carved from scrap bone. The figure came closer, becoming a man. Tall, slouched in the saddle, riding like the horse was an afterthought. She knew that posture. The laziness of it. The arrogance. Micah Bell. Her mouth went dry. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, the knuckles going white. She hadn't seen him in 6 years. Hadn't heard a word. She had hoped, prayed, in those desperate midnight hours when the wind howled like the wolves he used to run with, that he was dead. But men like Micah didn't die easy. Arthur stiffened beside her. "That him?" Florence nodded once. "Inside. Now." Arthur hesitated. "You sure?" Her tone sharpened. "Go get your sister." He ran inside. Florence stayed on the porch, back straight, hands by her sides. She could feel her heart beating in her throat. Micah Bell swung down from the saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd never worked a real job in his life. His boots crunched on the gravel path as he grinned at her, teeth yellow, eyes too bright. A snake with a drawl. "Well, ain't this the picture?" he said, arms outstretched. "Little house on the prairie, garden comin' in, chickens runnin' wild. You been busy, Florence." She didn't move. Didn't speak. He kept talking. That was Micah's way. Fill the air with words until you forgot what silence was. "I heard tell there was rain comin'. Figured I'd check in on my kin." His smile widened. "See if my girl still looks like her mama." Florence's stomach twisted. He didn't mean her. As if summoned, Beatrice's laugh chimed through the open door. And there she was, 7 years old, barefoot, hair tangled with grass and ribbons, running toward the man on the porch with a squeal of delight. "Daddy!" Florence's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't told Beatrice much. Just that her father was gone, and gone was good. Micah scooped her up and spun her in the air. "There's my baby girl. Ain't you grown up sweet?" Florence took a step forward. "Put her down." Micah turned, holding Beatrice like a shield. "What? Can't a man hug his own daughter? You forfeited the right to that word the day you ran off and left us with nothin' but debts and bruises." His smile slipped just a little, enough to see the edge behind the charm. "That so? Last I checked, I put this roof over your head." She stepped onto the porch, closing the space between them. "Last I checked, I've been holdin' it up with my own hands ever since." Micah stared at her for a long moment, the muscles in his jaw ticking. Then he laughed. "Always was fire in you. I miss that." He carried Beatrice inside without asking. Florence followed, one hand brushing the hammer Arthur had left on the windowsill. She didn't take it. Not yet. The inside of the house was dim, cool, the air thick with heat and tension. Micah made himself at home, setting Beatrice on his lap at the table, reaching for the stale cornbread on the plate. Arthur stood in the kitchen doorway, shoulders tense, eyes locked on Florence. "Well, well," Micah said between bites. "This place could use a man's touch. Got chickens but no meat. A hoe but no plow." Florence moved quietly, deliberately, setting a pot of water on the stove. "Why are you here, Micah?" "Already told you. Rain's comin'. Thought I'd stay a spell." "No." His eyes flicked up. "No. You're not staying." He leaned back, arms over the chair. "And who's gonna stop me? You?" "That boy." He glanced toward Arthur with a smirk. Florence didn't blink. "If I have to." Micah's grin returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You always were good at pretending to be tough. But I remember the nights you begged." "Do you remember the nights I bled?" she said softly, not for him, but for Arthur, who flinched as the words sank in. Silence. The water on the stove began to hiss. Florence turned and took the tin of tea leaves from the shelf, fingers steady. She crushed the herbs, measured the laudanum drop by drop, careful not to let the bottle clink too loudly. Micah kept talking. About old times. About some job gone wrong in New Mexico. About a man named Silas he'd left in a ditch. Beatrice giggled at something he said, unaware of the rot just beneath the surface of her father's words. Florence brought him a cup of tea, setting it down without a word. He looked at it, then at her. A peace offering? Just tea. Micah sniffed it, then drank deep. He made a face. Strong. She gave a small smile. You always did like it strong. He grunted, drained the cup. You're different, Florence. I had to be. Beatrice yawned, crawled off his lap, and went to Arthur, who scooped her up and carried her to the back room. When the door clicked shut, Florence sat across from Micah. His lids were drooping. You know, he slurred, maybe I will stay. Help around the place. Show Arthur how to be a real man. Raise Beatrice proper. His words blurred. She watched him carefully, studying the way his jaw slackened, the glaze forming over his eyes. You never changed, she said quietly. Not once. And you thought the world would keep forgiving you. Micah swayed in his chair. You don't get to. He never finished. His body slumped forward, head hitting the table with a dull thud. The cup rolled from his hand and shattered on the floor. Florence didn't move for a long moment. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the wind rustling through the warped shutters. Then she stood, walked to the back room, and opened the door. Arthur looked up. He asleep? He asked. She nodded. Arthur stood slowly, placing Beatrice gently on her bed, brushing a hand across her forehead. You gonna call the sheriff? No. He didn't ask why. They stood together in the hallway, mother and son, bathed in the pale light of dusk. I'll get the tarp, Arthur said. Florence touched his arm. Take the hatchet too. Outside, the sky had turned from gold to bruised purple. The wind picked up, carrying with it the first smell of rain in months. Florence stared at the horizon as the weight in her chest loosened for the first time in years. Micah Bell had come back. And now he was never leaving again. She closed the door behind her, and the darkness that followed was not unwelcome. Micah's body slumped forward, his head lolling to one side like a puppet with its strings cut. His hand twitched once before going still, fingers limp around the shattered tea cup on the floor. The laudanum had worked faster than she expected. Florence didn't breathe. Not until Arthur appeared behind her, the tarp bundled awkwardly in his arms and the hatchet dangling from his hand like it was heavier than iron. Is he gone? He whispered. Florence stepped forward, leaned close to Micah's chest. She could hear a heartbeat, slow and distant, like footsteps fading into a tunnel. Her voice was a low murmur, meant only for Arthur. Not yet. But soon. Arthur's mouth twitched. We wait. She shook her head. We move. They worked in silence, not the uneasy kind that prickled with things left unsaid, but the sort that comes when survival outweighs sentiment. Arthur dropped the tarp by Micah's boots and stepped back, eyes trained on his mother. Florence went to the cupboard and took out a length of rope. She glanced once toward the back bedroom. Beatrice slept soundly, dreaming the innocent dreams only children were allowed. The door was shut. That was good. She needed it to stay shut. She knelt beside Micah's body, took his wrist, and tested the weight of him. Heavy. Too heavy to carry alone. Arthur moved beside her without being asked. Together, they rolled him from the chair. His body hit the floor with a hollow thud that seemed to echo. The floorboards creaked under the impact, a soft groan of the house bearing witness. Head first or feet? Arthur asked, voice strained. Feet. The tarp was coarse, old canvas with stains that wouldn't wash out. It had once covered firewood. Now it would carry something else. They pulled his legs onto it first, then worked his torso into place. His head lolled back, mouth slightly open, eyes half shut. Florence stared down at him, remembering another night, years ago, when he'd come home drunk and thrown a chair through the window because dinner was cold. She had cleaned up the glass with her bare hand. He hadn't said sorry. She rolled the tarp over his body, tucking it tight, wrapping the ends like she was swaddling a child. The irony made her chest ache. Arthur stood frozen. Do we bury him? No, she tied the rope, cinching it around the bundle. Too dry. We'd never get more than a few inches down. Then what? She met his eyes. We burn him. Arthur flinched. What if someone sees? They won't. Not this far out. Outside, the wind had picked up. The trees hissed with it, dry branches scraping together like bones. Dust skated across the porch and swirled at the corners of the house. A storm was building on the horizon. Florence felt it pressing on her skin like a coming truth. They dragged the body to the door. It caught on the frame, thumped against the edge like a final protest. Arthur pushed harder. Florence didn't look away. They carried it between them, one gripping the feet, the other the shoulders, staggering slightly under the weight. The tarp made it awkward. The wind caught the loose edge and flapped it like a sail. They passed the old well. Dry. The rope hanging down into darkness. Arthur said, "We could drop him in." Florence shook her head. The smell rise up by summer. They reached the mallee trees at the edge of the property, gnarled and skeletal, their roots tangled above the ground like fingers clawing through dust. It was the place snakes coiled to die, where birds wouldn't nest. She found a patch between two blackened stumps, old from a fire that had passed through 3 summers ago. The ground was cracked but clear. This'll do. Arthur dropped his end. We got kerosene left? In the shed. He ran off and she stood over the bundle, her breath steady now. Micah Bell. 6 years of silence, and then he came riding in like he owned the world. He always did like to arrive like a storm. Arthur returned with the can, sloshing liquid inside. Florence took it from him, uncapped it, and poured slowly, deliberately, soaking the canvas until it gleamed in the moonlight. The smell filled her nostrils, sharp and chemical and clean in its finality. Matches, she said. Arthur handed her a small tin box. Her fingers trembled as she struck the first one. It sputtered, flared, and died. Second try. A flame burst to life, snapping in the wind. She dropped it onto the tarp. Fire caught instantly, racing along the folds like it had been waiting all its life for this moment. Orange light danced across their faces. Arthur stepped back. The body jerked once. Air escaped the tarp with a wet hiss. Florence didn't move. Didn't blink. She stared into the flames, watching them consume the shape beneath. She thought of Beatrice, asleep with her rag doll. Thought of the years spent scraping food from nothing. Thought of bruises. Of silence. Of surviving. The fire roared higher, crackling as it consumed the past. Arthur's voice was small. "Does this make us bad?" Florence didn't answer at first. The flames were too loud. Finally, she said, "It makes us free." They stayed until only ash remained. The wind carried some of it into the night. The rest scattered at their feet. Rain began as a whisper, 1 drop, then 2. Florence turned her face up and let it hit her skin. Cold and real. Arthur wiped his face on his sleeve. "It's really rainin'." She nodded. After a year, it finally came. He looked at the pile of smoldering ashes. "You think this is over?" "No," she said. "But it started." They walked back in silence. Inside the house, the air felt lighter, as if the walls had exhaled. Florence placed the kettle on the stove again, just for comfort. Arthur went to check on Beatrice. "She's still asleep," he said, coming back. "Didn't hear nothin'. Good." Florence sat at the table, stared at the empty cup still lying where Micah had dropped it. She picked up the pieces, one by one, and placed them in a small pile. "I'll bury the rest in the ashes," she said. "Tomorrow." Arthur sat across from her. "What if someone comes lookin'?" He said folks knew he was headin' this way. "Let them look." "And if they ask?" She looked him in the eye. "We tell the truth." Arthur tensed. "We tell them he came. We fed him. He left. That's all. The boy nodded slowly. He understood. There was no pride in this. No victory. Just necessity. She stood, poured 2 cups of hot water, steeped fresh tea, and handed one to him. They sat together, sipping, the sound of rain now steady on the roof. A knock came at the door. Both froze. Florence set her cup down, quietly. She stood, gestured for Arthur to stay seated. She moved to the door and opened it an inch. Sheriff Halder stood on the porch, rainwater dripping from his hat. His horse pawed the ground behind him. "Evenin', Florence." "Sheriff." He looked past her shoulder. "Got word Micah Bell might be passin' through these parts. You seen him?" Her heart thudded once hard. She kept her face still. "Not in 6 years. He said he might come here. Had you down as next of kin." She shrugged. "Ain't got no use for that man." He studied her face a moment. She met his gaze without blinking. The sheriff sighed. "Well, if you see him, let me know. We'd like a word or two." Florence nodded. "Of course." He tipped his hat, turned, and mounted up. Rain soaked his shoulders as he rode off down the road. She closed the door softly behind her. Arthur was still at the table, eyes wide. "You lied." "No," she said. "I told him what he needed to hear." She walked to the back door, opened it. The rain was heavier now, drumming on the porch roof, washing the dust away. She stood in the doorway a long time, watching the land drink. The garden plot was dark and wet. If the rain held, it might live. Arthur came up behind her. "Think things you'll grow now?" "I think they'll try," she said. The sky cracked with lightning, illuminating the field where fire had once burned. Behind her, Beatrice's soft footsteps echoed from the hallway. Florence turned, smiled at her daughter, and held out a hand. "Come on, little one," she said. "Time to get some sleep. We've got planting to do in the morning." The girl yawned, took her mother's hand, and disappeared down the hall. Florence stayed behind a moment longer. The fire was out. The tea was gone. The past had finally been fed to the earth. But rain brought more than crops. It brought mud. And in mud, things buried too shallow could rise again. Still, for tonight, the house was quiet. And Florence allowed herself a small, tired smile. She had weathered the drought. Now came the flood. The storm didn't break until after midnight. Thunder crawled across the hills like a growling beast, low and distant, threatening to wake the world from its uneasy sleep. Rain battered the roof in uneven waves, a nervous rhythm tapping out secrets above Florence's bed. She lay with her eyes open, listening. Arthur's breathing was soft across the room. Beatrice lay curled against her side, one arm draped over her stomach, her tiny fingers twitching in dreams. Florence stared at the dark ceiling and waited for the morning, but the night would not release her. Micah's face refused to leave her mind, bloated, slack-jawed, that awful sound when his body hit the floor. Even now, though the fire had erased him, his presence clung to the walls like smoke. It was in the way the wind moaned through the boards, in the scent of burnt canvas that refused to wash from her hands. She rose before the sun, careful not to wake the children. The house creaked beneath her feet, familiar and worn, the floorboards remembering every step she had ever taken. She moved through it like a ghost. The storm had passed. Outside, the air smelled new, clean and raw, like the earth had torn itself open to breathe again. She stepped onto the porch and stared toward the grove of mallee trees. A faint column of steam rose where they'd burned the body, mingling with early mist. The fire had consumed the man. The land had swallowed the rest. She gathered the ash bucket and an old spade, her body moving automatically. Muscle memory. Get up. Do what needs doing. Survive. By the time Arthur joined her, the sun was pushing up over the horizon, casting pink light over the sodden field. He didn't speak. Just picked up a second shovel and walked beside her. The fire pit was still smoldering. The blackened earth looked like a wound, raw and ugly. Ash had drifted across the roots, settling in the grooves like powdered bone. Bits of scorched rope, hunks of melted metal from Micah's belt buckle, nothing else remained. Arthur crouched and picked up a warped spur, the metal twisted into a cruel, hooked shape. Should we bury this? No, Florence said. Scatter it. He stood, turned slowly in a circle, and began tossing pieces into the brush, sending each bit as far as he could. Florence plunged her spade into the soft, burned soil and began to dig. Not a grave. Just enough to turn the earth. To hide what was left beneath wild growth. It didn't have to be clean. Just forgotten. As they worked, birds began to sing again. The strange quiet that had hovered since Micah's arrival began to lift. The land, starved for water and free of old ghosts, breathed differently now. Arthur leaned on his shovel. You think he'll come back? Not him, I mean someone else. She didn't answer immediately. She wiped the sweat from her brow and studied the dark soil. It was rich now, soft from rain and ash. He always had people, she said. Men who owed him. Men he lied to. Arthur nodded. Then we should be ready. We are. She stood, shook the dirt from her hands, and looked toward the house. Smoke curled from the chimney. Beatrice would be stirring soon, hungry and asking questions. They cleaned themselves at the well, using rainwater caught in the basin. Arthur watched the horizon while Florence scrubbed the soot from her arms. She caught him glancing toward the road more than once. You worried? She asked. Not for me. She dried her hands on her apron. Don't worry for me either. Not anymore. They returned to the house. Beatrice sat at the table with a piece of dry bread in her hand, her hair a halo of knots and straw. She grinned as they entered. Where'd you go? Checking the garden, Florence said. Rain did it some good. Beatrice's eyes widened. Will we get carrots? Maybe even tomatoes. Arthur poured her a cup of warm water and sat beside her, ruffling her hair until she squealed and swatted him away. The sound filled the room, sweet and full. Florence stood over the stove, pretending not to listen, her hands busy with the skillet, but her heart lodged firmly in her throat. Mid-morning brought the scent of damp wood and a breeze that whispered of spring. The sky had cleared, leaving behind a blue so sharp it felt like a lie. It was too beautiful, too clean. She kept looking toward the road. By midday, the hammering began. Arthur worked on reinforcing the barn door, patching cracks with salvaged board. He was methodical, quiet. Every thud of the hammer was a promise. We will be ready next time. Florence washed the sheets, the ones Micah had touched. She didn't stop moving until late afternoon, when the sound of hoofbeats turned her blood cold. Again. Not from the south this time, but the east. Faster. More hooves. Arthur dropped the hammer. Florence turned, wiping her hands, her throat already tightening. Beatrice rushed to the window. Visitors! Florence stepped onto the porch, squinting against the glare. 2 riders this time. Dust rising behind them in a thin, desperate line. She recognized the first man before she even saw his face. Jonas Pike. One of Micah's oldest running partners. Always smelled of blood and gunpowder. The second was younger, leaner, someone she didn't know. They rode straight up to the house and dismounted in one smooth motion. Jonas tipped his hat with a false smile. Florence. Jonas. He nodded toward the house. We heard Micah came through. He did. Where is he now? She held his gaze. Gone. The younger man narrowed his eyes. Didn't say where? He didn't say much at all. Jonas chuckled. That's strange. He owed us some answers. Thought we'd find him here. You thought wrong. The 2 men exchanged a glance. Arthur stepped out onto the porch, silent, his hand resting casually near the old rifle leaning against the doorway. Jonas noticed. Your boy's got guts. He gets that from me. Jonas studied her. The smile faded. He leave anything behind? Florence shook her head. Just mud. The younger man stepped forward, aggressive. Mind if we look around? I do. He smirked. What are you hidin'? Same thing I've always hidden, mister. Nothing a man like you would understand. Jonas held up a hand. Easy now. No one's here to start trouble. You rode in with trouble. Rain began to fall again, light but steady. It tapped against their hats, slicked the porch boards. Florence stepped forward. This is my land. You're not welcome. Jonas looked to the younger man, then back to her. We'll be back, Florence. I'll be here. They mounted up. Arthur didn't move until they were gone from sight. Florence kept her eyes on the road, her fists clenched at her sides. Should we run? He asked softly. She shook her head. No. If we run, we spend the rest of our lives doing it. Arthur nodded. Then we stay. They spent the rest of the afternoon sealing the doors, tightening the shutters, checking the supplies. The house transformed, not into a fortress, but into something close. A place that could stand against men who didn't believe a woman could say no. That night, Florence lay awake again. The rain had eased to a whisper. She rose and walked to the edge of the field. The garden had begun to drink. Tiny green shoots poked through the wet dirt like timid hands reaching toward light. Life, raw and insistent. Behind her, the trees still bore the scent of fire. She crouched, fingers in the dirt, and whispered to the soil. Grow. She thought of Micah, of the way his voice filled a room like smoke, of the way it had silenced her. She thought of Jonas, of what he might bring back. And she thought of Beatrice and Arthur, sleeping just yards away. Florence Carson had buried a man in fire and dared the world to come ask her why. Let them come. She had roots now, and fire in her bones. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled, thin and lonely. She stood and walked back to the house, the door closing behind her like the final page of a book. But not the end. Not yet. Florence stood at the window, staring out into the drenched horizon. Rain had carved shallow rivulets through the clay soil overnight, and water clung to the edges of the roof, dripping in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the beat of her heart. The mallee trees swayed gently, no longer crackling and brittle, but whispering among themselves as if they, too, were recovering from a long drought. Inside, the house was warm. The fire burned steady, and the scent of boiled oats filled the air. Beatrice sat on the floor with her doll, humming softly, her bare feet twitching to a tune only she seemed to know. Arthur leaned against the doorframe, watching the weather, his arms folded, jaw tight. He had not spoken much since the day before, not since Jonas Pike and that other rider had vanished into the rain, leaving more threat behind than they brought in words. Florence's eyes lingered on her son. His face had changed, hardened, sharpened by the weight he now carried. He had buried a body, built a wall around his sister's innocence, hammered nails with the understanding that they might keep violence out. He hadn't earned peace. He'd earned vigilance, and that was something she would never forgive the world for. She turned away from the window and moved toward the stove, pouring a ladleful of porridge into 3 bowls. "Breakfast," she called gently. Arthur stepped forward and took his without a word. Beatrice giggled as she set her doll in a chair beside her own bowl and offered it an imaginary spoonful. They ate in silence. Halfway through the meal, Arthur spoke. "He's coming back." Florence didn't ask who. There was no need. The way he said it, the certainty, the resignation, it could only be one man. "Maybe," she said. "He looked at you like he knew. I've had men look at me like that before." He hesitated. "We should leave. Go where they don't know our name. They'll just follow. Men like that always do. Then we fight." She met his eyes across the table. "We survive." He nodded and returned to his bowl, but the tension in his shoulders never eased. By midday, the sun broke through. Clouds peeled back like pulled wool, casting silver light over the soaked land. Florence stood outside, hands on her hips, surveying the garden. Shoots had sprouted, tiny, defiant things bursting up in places she hadn't even planted. The ash had fertilized more than she expected. In a few weeks there might be enough to eat. Beatrice played in the puddles with a stick, poking at wriggling earthworms and giggling at their slow-motion escape. Her dress was soaked to the knees, and her braids had come loose, but Florence didn't call her in. Let her be wild, just for today. Arthur came around the side of the house, his face drawn. There's a rider coming. Florence felt her breath leave her chest in one sharp blow. Same direction? He nodded. Fast. She handed him the rifle without a word and went inside. Beatrice whined when pulled from her play, but Florence wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to the back room, setting her down on the bed. You remember what we talked about? The girl nodded, suddenly solemn. Don't come out unless you say. Good. Not even if Arthur calls. Just me. Florence shut the door and slid the latch into place. When she returned to the porch, Arthur was already in position, crouched behind the old barrel with the rifle balanced on the rim. Rainwater still dripped from the eaves. The clouds above had begun to knit again. She followed his gaze. One rider. Same horse as before. Jonas Pike. He rode slower this time, but it wasn't a lack of confidence, it was calculation. His body leaned slightly forward in the saddle, like a man prepared to strike or be struck. Florence stepped forward to meet him. She let him see her. She let him see her hands were empty. Jonas reined in just outside the gate and tipped his hat like a gentleman, though the eyes beneath were stone. Florence. Jonas. I figured I'd give you the courtesy. What kind of courtesy's that? He dismounted and walked toward her, calm, casual. The kind where I ask instead of take. Arthur shifted behind the barrel. The rifle clicked softly as he adjusted his grip. Jonas glanced in the boy's direction. Still training him up, huh? Florence didn't blink. He learns fast. I'm not here to cause pain. Funny. Neither was Micah. And yet. Jonas frowned. You kill him. I helped him leave. You always were clever with words. Words didn't keep his hands off me back then. I'm done with clever. He paused, staring at her like a man trying to read scripture in smoke. He owed me. A cut from a job. I don't care about revenge. I want what's mine. Then go dig through the ashes. He flinched, just a flicker in the eyes. I know what you did, he said. She stepped down from the porch, closing the distance between them. Do you? Do you really? Because what I did was protect my children. What I did was survive a man who made every breath a wound. You tell me if that's a crime. Rain began again, soft at first, then harder, slicking the boards beneath her boots. Wind whipped through the yard, tugging at the shutters. Jonas looked over his shoulder at the horizon, then back at her. You burned him. She didn't answer. He sighed. Then I guess I've got a choice. Turn around or burn with him. Arthur stood. Try it. The rifle leveled. Jonas raised both hands slowly, a smirk dancing on the edge of his mouth. Easy, boy. I'm just talking that. Then you should keep your mouth still. Florence felt the moment tip. Something invisible shifted in the space between them, an understanding that no law would be coming. That no justice but their own would rule the land under their feet. Jonas looked at her one last time. You've got fire, Florence. Always did. But fire can burn everything, family too. I'm counting on it, she said. He turned slowly, walked back to his horse, mounted. Rain blurred the lines of his coat, turned his figure into a shadow as he rode off the way he came. They stood still until the sound of hoofbeats vanished. Arthur lowered the rifle. His breath came fast. You think he'll be back? If he's smart, no. And if he ain't? Then he'll learn what Micah did. She stepped forward, took the rifle from his hands, and leaned it against the porch post. The rain kept falling, steady now, nourishing the land. Inside, Beatrice opened the door just a crack and peeked out. Florence gave her a nod, and the girl ran forward and threw herself into her mother's arms, clinging tight. Florence held her, eyes closed, the damp weight of her daughter pressed against her chest like a promise. Arthur stood beside them, no longer just a boy. They had survived. Florence looked past them, toward the muddy road and the greening field beyond. The storm had broken. The drought was over. But she knew better than to believe in peace. She believed in rain. She believed in root. And most of all, she believed in the kind of fire that left no trace behind, just fertile ground for something stronger to rise from the ashes. Florence raised her head to the sky, eyes full, voice low. Let them come. She turned back into the house, closed the door behind her, and for the first time in years, she bolted it with calm hands.